It was a cool day on April 10th, 1912 in Southampton, but the large crowd gathering didn't seem to mind. They were at the docks to witness something extraordinary. They were there to watch the biggest and most luxurious ship ever to touch the seas of this earth set sail on her maiden voyage. Some called it an unsinkable ship. Some called it the Ship of Dreams. Some called it the pride of Bruce Ismay's White Star Line. But all agreed it was special and a sight to see, and the cool air was subdued by the feeling of awe and amazement. The pride couldn't have been greater for Ismay, who made it a habit out of traveling on his company's ships when they embarked on their maiden voyages. Little could he have imagined what lay ahead both for his ship and the thousands of souls on board, including his own, because on April the 14th, the dream ended and the nightmare began when the Titanic struck an iceberg. The unsinkable titan of the sea would lay at the bottom of the ocean floor just 3 hours later, taking 1,500 lives with it. Just over 700 would survive, and the White Star Line's chairman, Bruce Ismay, was one of them. He would not only feel the weight of the loss of every person on that ship, including many friends, but he would endure a vengeful series of attacks in the press, which were filled with half-truths and outright fabrications. All because of a combination of the public needing a villain and a vengeful news mogul, William Hearst. Unfortunately, and despite being cleared by two extremely thorough inquiries in America and England, the narrative of Hearst's papers became accepted historical narrative. Ismay would be dogged with the trauma of losing the ship, the weight of the lives lost, and also the weight of a falsehood calling him a coward for leaving the ship when women and children were still on it. Clifford Ismay, a cousin of Bruce's, decided the time had long since come for the truth to be told and the record set straight. Through extremely thorough and deep research, he wrote the book, Understanding J Bruce Ismay, the true story of the man they called the coward of the Titanic. We sat down with him for a powerful interview to finally hear the truth. Cliff Ismay, author of Understanding J Bruce Ismay. It's a fascinating book. It tells, I think, a more complete and true story of, I think, one of the most misunderstood figures in the Titanic history, Bruce Ismay. With Mr. Ismay in the process of building the Titanic, how involved was he in deciding things like safety protocols, lifeboats?
Not quite as involved as people would popularly believe. So, of course, he was the president of the International Mercantile Marine, also chairman of the White Star Line. But, of course, he was answerable to his fellow directors. So it would be involved to a point. It would be involved to a point of helping with the decor, etc., etc. And it would work closely with Thomas Andrews and his predecessor regarding the structure of the ship. As how it would be involved in the lifeboats, I'm not exactly sure. I think that topic isn't quite covered in my book. The reason being because I couldn't find any evidence either way to prove or disprove anything. But the rumor has it that Harold Sanderson was the guy that decided on the number of lifeboats on Titanic. However, that's conjecture, and I don't have any evidence to back that up at the moment. But yeah, I think he often went over to Belfast, and he used to look at the progress of the ship and give his little input here and there on what was to be on board, what wasn't to be on board. So I would say probably about an input of about maybe 60-70% of the ship, I think.
The year before, he took a trip on the Olympic, and being so similar to the Titanic, he noted little improvements here and there that would be made.
Yeah, he did. It was the plan of both himself and his father, before him, Thomas Henry. They would make a point whenever they could of being present on all of the maiden voyages of the White Star Line. And certainly Olympic and Titanic for Bruce was to be no exception. His father, Thomas, died in 1899, so he was out of the picture by the time the Olympics came along. But yeah, I mean, he spent hours and hours, well, most of the maiden voyage on the Olympic, just walking up and down, chatting to all the cooks, the stewards, the engineers, everyone, asking for their inputs on how they felt improvements could be made to the ship. And of course, speaking with the passengers, he wanted their input on how they felt the ship was on all three classes. So yeah, that was his part. I mean, yeah, the potato peeler wasn't working properly. They decided to move a couple of doors in the first class dining room and things like that. But it was all really just to do with the comfort and safety of all those on board.
They took a lot of pride in the work they did and in the quality of those ships. It wasn't just money making. I think your book made that quite clear that there was a lot of pride in it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it started off again to go back to Bruce's father, Thomas Henry, in his day. He had a vision that he wanted to build the largest, most luxurious ships the world had seen. And I think to a large degree, he accomplished that. They were never after they didn't want to create the fastest ships. They weren't really in for the blue ribbon award for the Atlantic crossing. Although one of the White Star liners did actually win that in about, can't remember the date exactly, but around about 1880, I think. But the plan was they wanted, as I said, the largest and most luxurious ships that was sailing the sea, especially on the North Atlantic crossing. And after Bruce's father died and Thomas died, and Bruce took over the company, and then he sort of carried on with the same ethos.
Is there any evidence to support that Bruce interfered with or ordered the Titanic or Captain Smith to speed it up, and thus causing a safety issue?
I think that story came from a first class passenger. I believe her name was Elizabeth Lyons, who swore that she'd overheard a conversation between Smith and Ismay, either in one of the dining rooms or close to one of the dining rooms one evening. And that, yeah, as you say, that was displayed by James Cameron's latest film. Again, I don't think there's any real evidence to say that conversation actually took place. I suggest it maybe didn't, and I say that because when Elizabeth Lyons was examined at the American inquiry, she was asked to describe Bruce, and she couldn't describe him at all. And similarly with Captain Smith, she wasn't too sure of his appearance. So that kind of alludes to the fact that maybe she might have been mistaken with the presence of Bruce, but who knows? But again, Bruce had drafted a letter to be sent to Captain Smith before Titanic departed, telling him that under no circumstances was the Titanic to arrive at the Ambrose Lighthouse before the appointed time. And there were a lot of reasons for that. I mean, if Titanic had arrived early, it would have caused all kinds of problems for the passengers, for the transfers between the dock and the hotel, for the Titanic berthing properly. So the evidence that I have found suggests that they weren't after a fast crossing at all. And maybe that conversation with Elizabeth Lyons maybe wasn't 100% correct. She may have, I don't think she was lying for one moment, but she may have been a little bit confused.
As far as Mr. Ismay being a passenger on the ship and not in pretty much any official role, what influence do you feel that he could have had on the captain and the ship's crew? Do you think that may have put some pressure on them to make decisions just because of his presence?
I think we'll never really know the answer to that question. But I guess to some degree, greater or lesser degree, I think that must have been the case with some of them. However, it was certainly fair to say as well that a lot of the crew members probably below the ranks of the most senior officers didn't even know who Bruce was. But with the senior officers, I don't know, maybe. Captain Smith, well, I don't think it will have influenced Captain Smith because, I mean, the captain is the captain. He's got on board the ship, as it were, and you know he was a well-experienced captain. He knew Bruce very well, and I don't think he would have felt intimidated by Bruce at all.
This being Captain Smith's final trip, how is their relationship over the years, and how is their like bond?
Well, it would be a strong bond. I mean, Captain Smith was also a good friend of Thomas Henry, Bruce's father. So the houses at one point they lived about half a city block away, so they'd often be calling at one another houses. And I suspect that Bruce will have known Captain Smith from when he was a very young man. So I think they will have had a very good bond with them, between them. And yeah, I think they knew each other not only professionally, but also socially.
His conduct during the sinking, the movie portrays it a certain way, but one thing I always interpreted, which you brought up in your book, the man was in his pajamas, a bathrobe, and slippers with no life vest. That doesn't suggest to me that he's a person that's that afraid or that selfish or anxious to save his own life. Can you talk a little bit about what he did and his behavior during the sinking?
I don't believe that he was wearing a life jacket. No, there's no evidence. All of the passengers' testimonies, they all state that he was wearing a pair of slippers, pajamas, and a dressing gown. And I dare say, in the heat of the moment, he left the cabin, not realizing what had happened. His own cabin. Went up to the bridge to assess the situation with Smith and the senior crew members. Now, at that point, when he realized how bad the situation was, I suppose there was nothing to stop him going down to his cabin to grab a life vest or getting a life. I'm sure there would have been life vests there for him just to grab hold of, but he didn't. His first reaction was he needed to get out there and help as many people as he could. So what he did when he left the bridge, he went initially to lifeboat number 7, which was on the starboard side, the side that was the collision with the iceberg. And he helped prepare the lifeboat, as in take all the covers off, etc., etc. And then he helped load the lifeboat. When he'd finished with lifeboat number 7, and that was being lowered away, he moved slightly forward to lifeboat number 5, where he did exactly the same, and again with lifeboat number 3. So had he wanted to get into any one of those lifeboats, maybe he could have, I don't know, but he certainly never made any attempt anywhere. From there, he moved over to lifeboat number 9, which is towards the stern of the ship, still on the starboard side. He assisted with that lifeboat, but for some reason there was a hold up in getting that lifeboat away. From then he walked over to lifeboats numbers 11, 13, and 15, but they were already being loaded away to the deck below. From there, he moved over to the port side of the ship, which I don't think has ever been documented, because this is evidence that I found from various sources. He assisted at lifeboat number 16, the sternmost lifeboat on the port side. And after that, he walked the full length of the port side down to the bow of the ship, where he met some people at lifeboat number 2, some ladies. And they were very reluctant to get on the lifeboat. I don't know the reasons they were reluctant, but I suppose it was because they probably didn't even at that point realize the ship was actually going to sink, and they didn't want to be lowered into the dark waters of the North Atlantic in a little wooden rowing boat. So this group of first-class ladies, he took back over to the starboard side, believing that there was still a lifeboat left there, which happened to be the collapsible lifeboat C, which he successfully got them into. And it was only when lifeboat C was being lowered away, and I think it was round about 8 or 10 spare seats in there. That was the moment that he decided to step in. But all the witness testimonies say that there were no other women or children around. So had he not got into that lifeboat, then it was a case of really no one else would have been saved. It wasn't as if he was taking a place. But what a lot of people don't realise, and I don't think it's ever been shown on any of the movies, it was actually there as an oarsman. So he was there to help row the lifeboats away from the Titanic when it was sinking. So he had a job to do when he got in there.
Which would explain why he wasn't facing the ship. He was facing away from it. It had nothing to do with shame or anything. It had to do with
exactly
duty.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah, that's a common misconception. He had his head turned away, his back to the ship, because he didn't want to see what happened to his lovely ship. But no, that wasn't the case. It was because he was helping rowing the boat.
You know, with your book, with reading the reports on the inquiries, other books, would you think it's fair to say he was more of the hero of a very horrific tragedy than this villainous figure that they made him out to be?
Interesting question. What defines a hero? Well, he certainly was very instrumental in saving a lot of lives before he left the ship. I certainly wouldn't class him as a coward. Hero. Well, certainly many people felt that he was a hero. There was a passenger on lifeboat number 16 on the port side toward the stern of the ship. He found a lady called Evelyn Marsden. Now, she was a first-class stewardess, but she also doubled up as a nurse to help the ship's doctor if required, because she was actually a trained nurse from Australia. And she was just standing by the lifeboat helping people in, and Bruce approached her and he said, why aren't you getting in this lifeboat? He said, well, I'm only a stewardess. He said, that doesn't matter. You're a woman. Get on that lifeboat. And afterwards, the gentleman she eventually married, well, eventually, it was only a few months after everyone was returned back to England. The woman, she married a doctor called William James, and he wrote a letter thanking Bruce for saving the life of his fiancée, later wife, and Bruce actually helped both of them get back to Australia to live the rest of their lives out there. So certainly to those two, it was a hero.
Your book talks about the effect the loss of his butler and his secretary had on him. Combining that with all the other losses he must have felt, the guilt over knowing so many people perished. What was his state of mind immediately after? And I guess let's start with, did he make any effort to resist testimony at any inquiries?
I don't think he made a deliberate effort to do that. I believe he was suffering from PTSD, which wasn't actually a recognized condition in those days. At least he certainly didn't have that name. So I believe he was suffering from that. I think he was very confused, because don't forget, the inquiry took place as soon as the Carpathia docked in New York. He was under the influence of opioids. However, I don't know how long that would take to get out of the system. I would guess that was probably It was clear of that then. But no, I don't think he made any deliberate attempts to mislead anyone, but I think he did make a couple of confusing statements that caused several other questions to be followed on with. But no, I don't think he made any deliberate efforts. No.
That could be completely related to shock.
Mm-hmm.
Having friends that have gone through it. I recognized a lot of the descriptions from Jack Thayer, some others on there you included, on how he was sitting there staring, how he would not utter a word, barely notice anyone's presence. And for someone in that type of traumatic state to just days later be forced to give testimony in a public inquiry, I think that speaks to his character and his willingness to help.
Well, exactly. I mean, as you just rightly pointed out, all the clues were there that I was in a deep state of shock, as I've no doubt many other passengers were on Titanic. But yeah, he lost his butler, he lost his secretary. I've no doubt he felt a lot of responsibility for all the other lives that were lost. So yeah, he will be in deep shock, and it can be a big thing. It can affect the mind. And I think he's tried his best at the inquiry to get the truth out there. But I think the problem for Bruce was he was tried and convicted before Carpathia ever reached New York. And I think for him to get from that position to a position of trustworthiness, I think it was very difficult for him.
You mentioned it in the book, and it's also well documented elsewhere. He had a friendship a long time ago with William Randolph Hearst, and a business disagreement had them falling out, and the Hearst papers were the ones that almost immediately began a pretty horrific character assassination, as your book points out.
Yeah, so Hearst was he was the big man in newspapers at the time, and it was actually Hearst that invented what we would now call the brand of yellow journalism. Not only with Ismay, but certainly he unleashed that with Ismay. So yeah, I think that was a lot to do with it. The two were very good friends. When Bruce had originally arrived in New York to work as a White Star agent, they used to socialize together in all the clubs and social events. I'm trying to name the one prestigious club. I can't think of the name of it. Or the Tuxedo Club. They often used to visit there together. And yeah, they were great friends until Hearst had asked Ismay to take a partnership in his newspaper business. Of course, Bruce Ismay hated the newspapers. He was actually a very shy man. He didn't like anything to do with the newspapers, so he declined Hearst's offer. And from that moment on, there was a huge fallout between the two of them. And of course, this was Hearst's chance to reap his vengeance on Ismay, which I believe is what happened.
What about Bruce's conduct when he got back? Did he, besides participating in both inquiries, did he have any efforts to help the families of the victims, the survivors, any type of charitable or monetary efforts, anything?
Oh yeah, there were lots of charities. I can't think of the names of them off the top of my head. But yes, he helped all sorts of widows, especially the crewmen. I think the widows of the crewmen. He set up about 3 or 4 different funds for those widows, benefit them and the children. I'm not sure what he did for the passengers, to be honest, but he was certainly mindful of the great losses that had suffered, and he tried to make it as easy wouldn't be the right word, but he tried to kind of make life just a little bit easier by giving them that compensation, which wasn't, in most cases, it just wasn't just a one-off thing. It was something that went on for several years.
it seems like he really did try to live a normal life. Like he was interested in a whole bunch of things. How did he balance trying to be a regular human with all this, you know, shame and guilt that he felt?
Another good question. I can't really answer that with 100% of certainty, but there were a lot of talks that after Titanic, Bruce lived a life of a recluse. He couldn't handle the press. He didn't want to speak to people, etc., etc. And he retired to a place on the west coast of Ireland that was very secluded, that was out of the public eye. Well, that wasn't quite what happened, because Costello Lodge that he bought just after Titanic sinking, it was something that he'd found quite a while earlier. So he had actually planned to retire in Costello Lodge anyway. And the people of Costello found him great, made lots of friends. And he did support the people of Costello while they were there. But as well as that, he was also running his other businesses, which were, he had shares in the Manchester Shipping Canal. He was a director of the London to Northern Railway Company. He was a director of several insurance companies. So to think that he actually retired from public life, as it were, that wasn't true. He was very busy. And he just wanted to buy the lodge in Costello because he loved fishing. And as any Irishman will tell you, I guess, the fishing on the west coast of Northern Ireland is fantastic. So he did that while he remained with his other home in Mayfair in London. So he kind of spent the summer fishing in Costello, and then at the winter time, he would return to London and carry on with his businesses.
It seemed, again, he really did not speak of the tragedy much, even with his closest family. But it seems that there is a passage that in Christmas time, 1936, one of his grandsons inquired to him about maritime shipping and the tragedy. And his quote back to him was, "Yes, I was once in a ship which was believed to be unsinkable." Why do you think maybe he finally broke his silence out to one of his family members?
Interesting that you found that one. Yeah, I believe that was true. That did take place. And also at the same time, he finally said that he was actually thrown into the lifeboat by one of the officers that were there. And why did he finally do that? Well, I guess for the remainder of his life, post-Titanic, I think he got into his head that it didn't matter what he said or done, people were going to condemn him. Well, you would say that. You would say this. So really, rather than bring all that up again, he used to just keep quiet about it. And I think it was only at the end of his life when he thought it's time that the truth was told. And I think that's how that came about.
Did you, in the course of your life or research, ever come across anyone who knew him, met him, anything like that?
No, unfortunately, time didn't allow that. For a very brief period, I was in communication with a woman who claimed she was one of his staff. I think it was at the London Mayfair home. But before I could actually get around to meeting her face to face, obviously she was getting on a bit, and we lost her before we got to that. So I think the short answer is no.
What made you write the book? Is it because of your kinship with him? Is it just a story that interested you? I mean, it's in your blood. It is your family.
Yeah, yes, no to that one. Yes, I mean, my first dealings with Titanic was when I was about 8 years old. I was in the sitting room with my father. We're watching the TV. Of course, back then it would be black and white TV, and I saw this huge ship sailing across the water, and I just turned around and said to my father, "Wow, Dad, look at the size of that ship." He said, "Do you know, son?" He said, "You're related to the guy that owned that ship." And that was my first indication. Of course, Bruce didn't actually own the Titanic as such, but for the mind of an 8-year-old, it was good enough. And I kind of got into it from that. But as far as the book goes, well, people often used to say to me when they would meet me, "Ismay, oh, are you related to the coward of the Titanic?" And my first answer to that would of course be, well, you know what? I don't believe on board Titanic that night there were any cowards at all. There were none. Um, but after hearing over and over again and seeing all the films with Bruce, I began to think, well, all these stories, they're all very similar. They seem to come from, the narrative seems to come from the same source. So I decided to look into it to see if there was another side of the story. And when I looked into things, I thought, yep, only half of the story is being told here, one side of the story. So I thought, it's time someone told Bruce's other side of the story. The Titanic's the second side of the story. And then who better than a relation of his?
Did you, in the course of your research and writing it, kind of get a sense for him as a person? Feel a type of connection to him in a way?
I did. I began to understand him better, which is probably the reason I chose the title Understanding J Bruce Ismay. Um, and yes, I found out a lot of things about him that I didn't know, such as the letter he drafted out to Captain Smith about not wanting to reach the Ambrose Lighthouse ahead of time, with no evidence that that letter was actually sent to Smith or whether Smith received it, but it was certainly drafted. And other things about him, his retirement being planned before Titanic sailed, etc. And one interesting thing I did find out, it's in the book, and I don't think anyone, I think very few people knew about this beforehand, was the fact that after Titanic's demise, he actually wanted to, although he was retiring as president of the International Mercantile Marine, he had a wish to retain chairmanship of the White Star Line. But the director that was replacing him and his fellow directors from the International Mercantile Marine said, "No, I'm sorry, your time's up. We don't want you having any other involvement with the White Star Line." So, of course, at that moment, he'd lost the company that his father had set up, a company that he grown up with all his life. So, yeah, there were a couple of interesting points that I found, and certainly they had to go in the book.
Do you got a good sense of him, like you said? How do you think he would have felt about your book? Would he have told you it's a waste of time? Would he have said kind of a humble thank you?
Going back to something you said earlier, Sean, I think if I'd been around in, say, 1920 to write this book, I think he probably would have said at that point, "You know what, Cliff, it's a waste of time. No one will believe that side of the story." Then in his last few years, I think he would have probably said a humble thank you. I certainly know his direct descendants that I know of, they were certainly happy with the way the book was written and received. Yeah.
I wanted to ask too about the ending of the book. You described how about a broken mirror. Can you kind of elaborate on what that was and why you decided to end the book that way?
I think it's very poignant. It was just a story that's been handed down from the family through generations. I believe it did happen, and I'm not sure if I could say there was any supernatural reason for it. I don't know. But certainly, yeah, it was the case that when the guy had arrived at the office, the mirror had fallen onto the floor and was shattered in several pieces. Just a huge coincidence. But there again, wasn't this whole story of Titanic full of coincidences? So I thought it was just a nice way to end the book.
You think there was ever a day of his life after Titanic he didn't think about it?
I don't think there was ever a day I didn't think about it. I think it was firmly impressed on his mind. I don't think he could ever get anything like that out of his head. He didn't talk about it very much, even with his family. Again, I kind of think this state of shock and depression, I think it stayed with him for a lot of years. So I didn't want to talk about that. I think the reasons for that were because of the shock, the depression, the PTSD, and also the fact that whenever he tried to say anything to defend himself, it was always knocked right back down again. So, I think he just thought, well, what is the point?
As far as the passion for the business that he had, I know that he was one of 5 children. I'm growing up working with his dad. What was the sense, or how do you think this passion just really wanting him in the White Star Line to see? Like, what if Titanic did not sink? Is there any recollections or thoughts from anyone related? What could have been?
What could have been? If Titanic did not sink, then of course the demise of the White Star Line was the merger with the Cunard Line in 1930, possibly 7, was it? Can't remember. I don't know what difference it would have made, but it was all to do with the depression in the shipping world at the time. There wasn't an awful lot of trade going about. I think it was inevitable at some time or other that White Star Line and Cunard would merge. What Cunard tried two occasions, I think, to buy out the White Star Line prior to Bruce Ismay's day, and vice versa. I think Thomas Henry tried to buy out the Cunard, and Lord Cunard tried to take over the White Star Line. This happened a couple of times. So I think eventually it would have happened. But what the difference would have been, I don't know, because the ethos of the two companies was so different. It was always the case that the White Star Line was about size, luxury, and comfort, where the Cunard Line was more or less about speed. Obviously, they wanted the passengers to be comfortable and entertained, but that's mainly what they were about at the time. Well, I think with merger, I think it was a joining of these two different ethoses, which made the Cunard Line what it is today.
You visited home of Mr. Ismay's and was able to spend some time there. Can you tell us about that and if it helped you feel a little more connected to him in a way?
That was an interesting story. So, I was invited down by the owner my wife and I were invited down to spend just a couple of days there to have a look around the place. And it was marvelous. I think since Thomas Henry's day, the house had only seen maybe about 6 other owners, and that was the house that Bruce grew up in. Bruce lived there from when he was about 3 years old until he was sent to private school at the age of 16, 17. But much of the old surroundings were there, and a couple of the cabinets, drinks cabinets, etc., were still in some of the rooms. There was a lot of Thomas Henry still in that building. You could sense it. And and it was fantastic to have a look around. And I don't think I'm finished there yet. I think there will be a couple more visits on the cards. But yeah, it was certainly a lovely insight into Thomas Henry's world. I had one interesting question answered when I was there. I always believed that Thomas Henry was a Freemason, but I was never sure, never 100% sure. But while I was at Dorpool House, near the entrance, there was a certain writing on the wall, as they say, which was a Masonic expression. Basically, what it meant was, welcome, brother, enter with an open heart. Once I realized that connection, I thought, yeah, it was. I suppose in those days, it was prudent to be a member of the society when you were going about your business. So that was a lovely thing to find out. Just one of those little questions I've often wondered, and now I know, because it's a thing that's always been in the family. But yeah, it was a huge house. It's had some alterations done over the years, but I think the present owner is trying to get the house more back to how it was in Thomas Henry Ismay's day. Fantastic.
That made me tear up a little bit, what you just said, because there's a group I belong to. Stupid thing can't. You can sort of see my arm.
Oh yeah. I say,
So,
yeah.
I
don't have a tattoo, but I recognize it.
I've been a Freemason for almost 20 years, so it's definitely a good connection.
I thought when I saw you smile, yeah. Nice to meet you, brother. Yeah.
Are you as well?
Not at the moment. I was for a lot of years, but I had a disagreement with someone in the lodge. And as they say, if you have a disagreement with a fellow brother, it is better one of you leaving the lodge rather than the harmony of the lodge be disrupted. I think I'm okay to say that. So I stood up and I said, well, I'll leave.
Well, you're always a brother. It doesn't matter if you leave.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's something I'll be going back into within the near future, I believe.
One of the most honorable things in the world is being able to speak for the dead who can't speak for themselves. And I think that you've done a very amazing and heroic thing in speaking for a man who can't speak for himself, and really got treated like no one ever should have to be treated, for a wide array of reasons. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. It was an interest. The first book review I had was in a very well-known newspaper in the UK. And the book critic that wrote the article, his opening line was, Mr. Ismay is either a very brave man or a fool for writing this book. So I hope it was the former.
It is definitely. His story deserves to be told, and doesn't matter if he was a shy man or he thought nothing would be believed. He shouldn't have to be remembered that way. And you're his voice. You spoke for him.
Thank you.
So thank you.
So.
Everybody, please, I will put a graphic up when this is edited, so it'll be nice on the screen. But please go out and on Amazon or look up for your local bookstore, Understanding J Bruce Ismay by Clifford Ismay, and read it. It's a great read. It really is.
Okay. Could I just add to that as well?
Yes, sir.
I also do collector's editions, which are limited number certificates that come with the book. So if anyone wants any of those autographed from me, they're available by contacting me through author.ismay@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to take it from there if they make an inquiry.